Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. Out of town, so I had to do a makeshift setup to get started for this evening's Just My 3 Cents podcast. Glad to be back with y'all. Missed last Wednesday, so we did a special edition on Sunday. But this is the live interactive rapid fire podcast where you can participate with me and join a discussion. So hopefully y'all will get in here. I didn't get a chance to promote the show like I wanted to, but hopefully some of y'all will get in here and ultimately join the broadcast. That's the ultimate goal, is that you jump on with me and give us your 3 cents on these tough topics of race, sex, and culture. And obviously in the news this week, to a degree, the leaking of the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe versus Wade got leaked to Politico early, so I don't want to get into all the details that you already understand. You know, our ultimate goal anytime we're doing the Just My 3 Cents podcast or the Mental Dialogue talk show on Saturday mornings is only if we're addressing it in a way that's different than what you're hearing in the media. I would definitely provide some info, but the bigger thing is that we have dialogue in which we can raise the culture. And so versus having a conversation simply over whether we agree or disagree with abortion, because that's been going on for all our lives, right? And I'm pretty sure most of you are aware of, in a sense, the attack and the setup to get to this day, right? What's been happening with the attempt to overturn Roe versus Wade. This has been pretty much waged for the entire 50 years in the sense that it got voted on, I think, back in 73 when the Supreme Court voted 7-2 to actually put, in a sense, make abortion legal in the country, if you will. And so pretty much since that time, those who are on the other side of it were fighting to get to this day in which Roe v. Wade was overturned. One thing I did want to highlight as a detail, because I listened to a lot of the arguments brought in the case, listening to the Supreme Court is on C-SPAN or whatever, right? So I was able to actually hear the arguments being made. And it was one thing that I heard that is just a detail to be very aware of, in a sense, what was done legally specifically versus just simply the idea of it wasn't just an argument of whether abortion is right or wrong or if it's legal or not. That's not, in a sense, how in a sense, Roe v. Wade was turned over, if you will. It's basically, this one piece of thing that I heard from the thing that I wanted to make sure everybody knew, because I thought this was unique. And it was when one of the justices asked the plaintiff, if you will, as far as the argument that you're putting forth here today, you have no concern if the states themselves, if you will, right? If the states themselves will decide to keep abortion or get rid of abortion. And the plaintiff said, no, that's not the argument I'm making. We're talking basically, if you're not familiar historically with the Supreme Court, there's always two trains of thoughts, in a sense. Are you going to follow the constitutional law of exactly what the Supreme Court, the federal court should be involved in, versus are you going to interpret the Constitution, or you're going to be that type of justice where you interpret it based on the times. So that's always the dialogue that's going back and forth or whatever. But I just wanted to highlight that the plaintiff made it very clear that had no problem with a state deciding to keep or get rid of abortion. Obviously, the ultimate goal was to overturn Roe v. Wade. So I'm not devoid of the goal, but I wanted to highlight legally for those who hadn't had a chance to pay attention to exactly what happened, at the Supreme Court during the actual arguments. It wasn't just simply, overturn Roe v. Wade and get rid of abortion. Like, that's not the argument that was being made, just in case you haven't heard any details. And that was the one thing that stood out, was for the plaintiff, it was a matter of law of whether the federal government should be involved, and did they overreach based on the letter of the Constitution to be involved in this situation. And so part of the way you do it, and this has been done before, Topeka versus Board of Education, that famous case was turned over with a bunch of many cases that led up to the Supreme Court. So that's what they were doing with some of the, states deciding we're going to make abortion legal. It was all to get to this day. So that part I think everybody understands, but I just wanted to highlight that they wasn't simply at the court trying to make abortion illegal. It was to get the federal government out of the business of deciding whether do they have the right to even be in that position. So just wanted to get that clarity. The ultimate reason that I'm doing this dialogue is, again, we want to raise the culture, right? Just my 3 cents. The idea is to raise the culture. And so again, above and beyond, do you agree or disagree with abortion? What was more important, and I call this the reality of the banning of abortion, is the messaging that's necessary going forward, now that the landscape can be very different. So how unlikely what's going to happen is blue states will keep abortion and red states will get rid of abortion. That's the simple play of more than likely what's going to happen, because again, it wasn't a situation where citizens, if you will, if you're in a state and you want to vote to have abortion made illegal under different parameters, that can be done. As the plaintiff said in that when asked that specific question, that he had no concern with states that choose to and fully expected them to keep it or whatever. Like, for example, California probably ain't gonna be getting rid of abortion, right? Just keeping it above. But the bigger point for this dialogue and for the culture is is there discussion necessary based on this new reality? And I think it is very necessary. And here's what crossed my mind as I was thinking about this show. Excuse the lighting today, but hopefully y'all can see me. The thing that crossed my mind the most during this show is I want to think about the history. This has been around for 50 years. So the majority of us have grown up in a culture in which abortion was on the table, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. It was on the table and part of pretty much the landscape in most states, right? We all kind of, to a degree, grew up with that for the most part. And so if we're honest about that, the reality is abortion to a degree can erase a mistake that you might have made or not being prepared for a child. That's something that could happen. I want to say this. I want to stay out of, in a sense, the 5% of cases of, where rape's involved. I'm talking about for the sake of this dialogue, because the majority of abortions are not taking place, if you will, in those extreme examples, which obviously play on your heartstrings. And again, it's not about whether abortion is right or wrong here, but I want to kind of take them out of the context and talk about what the average. For example, if you're on the IG page, I put up, I'm gonna try to do this off the top of my head, but I think the New York Times or somebody put out the average abortion takes place. I'm gonna try to do it off the top of my head. I should go find it. But let's see if I can do it off the top of my head. Somebody that's already a mother. So I guess basically this is maybe possibly a second child, low income. Just trying to, the average case, this is the average case of those who are having abortions. And so they may be deciding for a lot of reasons. It could be low income reasons. It could be health reasons. Be a lot of reasons why they could decide to or not to get an abortion, if you will, right? And so again, what I want to highlight is something that I think nobody's taking time to talk about. And I get it. It just happened. So right now, everybody's going back and forth about whether they agree or disagree with the decision, whether abortion is right or wrong. But the higher conversation is, if this is the new landscape, what does that look like for how we teach and talk to our culture and to the youngins coming up? Because here's again, I said this a few seconds ago, but I want to make this point very clear. So if you are listening to this, and if you've ever had an abortion or you've been a man who's had somebody get an abortion, think about this right here. How different might your life be had you not, whatever your reason, again, I'm not trying to judge whether you should have or not, but how different might your life be had you not been able to do it? Let's say you're the average, you already got one kid, and now it's, do I have enough money to feed all these mouths? You got 3 kids, or whatever the case may be. How different might your life be had you had an abortion not been on the table? For no judgment for those who have gotten it. How different might your life be? The reason I'm asking that question is because with the landscape as it has been, And most people that decide to get an abortion, even for good reason, if you will, their logic and what was going on in their life, it was the better decision. They may have personal regret because, again, I get it. It's not an easy decision to, have to even make that decision, right? So, again, not judging that part, but the unfortunate reality is if you didn't have that option, and you can admit right now your life would look a lot different had that not been an option, then it becomes imperative that as a culture, we prepare the children for the new landscape. If your life would have been completely different had that not been on the case, that's the world the kids are living in right now. In a world in which we've always known the world is getting over sexualized, if you will, and now all the advertising and the sexualized stuff is in your hand on your phone, a very different world than we grew up in. And so, again, regardless of whether you were for it or against it, I mean, the reality is when it comes to a decision such as having a child in a situation in a situation that's not ideal, in which you did not prepare, you could be, you could be against it and get in a circumstance and actually be for it. Like that's the way morality moves around in our personal lives if we keep it in a book. And so, again, this discussion is not for me about the morality. I hope some of you jump on and move it to the responsibility of what it looks like today. And here's what I thought about. So while we're arguing and upset about whether it's right or wrong, and whether this law is about controlling, women's bodies and things of that nature, again, I don't want to be in that discussion at all. I want to have the discussion of now, if this is the reality, what should we be discussing? And I think that's going to require, here's the hard part, there has to be messaging. You can't just have this happen and we don't improve the messaging to the next generation. Because, again, we've played out the last 50 years with it in place in this country, right? And so you can't just go about your business and just argue over trying to get it back in place without discussing what does that look like for children when that's not on the table. We have to have that discussion. And here's the hard part. The hard part is if this is now the new lay of the land, and say your state is one that bans it, right? Because, again, some states will keep it. Just keep it in the buck. I don't care what side you're on of it, but if you're in a state that now bans it, right? And don't shoot to the extremes of somebody having to cross state lines and getting dangerous abortions. I'm not saying this new situation doesn't create that. That's not what I'm saying. I just want to stay away from those and talk about the average situation so that we realize that the dialogue, if this is the new lay of the land and you're in a state in which now bans it, the dialogue is going to force, believe it or not, it's going to force, or we can choose not to do this, it's going to force the both political sides to have dialogue about what the messaging is going to be for the children. Of course, those who have been against abortion all this time or are happy about this, Roe v. Wade being turned over. Of course, we know their word is always accountability, right? That's what they've been saying for years. And then when you start talking about specifically within our culture, within our community, the Black community, I think I posted it. Unfortunately, there's always been this, for example, this high number of deaths via abortions that those on the right would like to point out in reference to how bad abortion was, right? And speaking of that, talking about the political sides, here's something that I've always found funny. I've always found funny when it comes to what the political agendas of the left and right are. I've always said when it comes to abortion, they actually are backwards based on what they typically fight for with their agenda. What I mean by backwards is, so in most of our lives, the left is pro-choice, right? And the right is pro-life. But if you put in perspective what their policies, what their political agendas, what they've come to be known for, it actually is backwards. That the left is pro-choice and the right is pro-life. And here's what I mean. So if you're think about the agenda of the Republicans, which is less government, right? That's how this is what they use to overturn this, this case, right? Roe v. Wade was, moving it back to the states, getting away from the federal level. So they're smaller government, right? They're less for government programs, things that taxpayers need to pay for, in a sense, any level of, I should say any level, but socializing, like they move away from that, right? So there's not a lot of programs. So I find it unique when you think about specifically the pro-life and pro-choice argument itself for the group that doesn't want to set up programs for these possibly, unfortunately, unwanted babies that people may have, or babies that they're not able to take care of. So it's crazy to me. It's actually always been backwards to me when it comes to a political agenda, that the group that doesn't want to have programs for these potential babies that now will be these extra babies that now will be born in the states that ban abortion, that they don't have programs for these future babies, or who may end up living off the government due to them being born to a low income mother. So it's like backwards. This, like, the right should have been pro-choice, and then vice versa. The left should have been pro-life, because they are the ones that set up the actual programs in the event that having too many children becomes a burden on you, right? So they vote for the program. So I've never understood, like we just talk about people vote against their own interests, if you will. That particular issue seems to be in the wrong group. I'm a political independent, by the way, just to throw that out there. So that's something that I always found funny. But again, back to the context of this discussion. And for those that are watching, make some comments, jump on, I'll read your comments. Love for you to hit the link and jump on him and give us your 3 cents as well. But the bigger point is, what now? What now? Not is abortion right or wrong, but how are we going to talk to these children in these next generations? Because for those of us who may have had an experience or had to deal with abortion, I got hit. I remember in my lifetime, I'll even highlight this, I got hit with a couple of scares, and luckily it wasn't my child, so I didn't have to actually, in a sense, make make that decision. But my mindset most of my life has been, no, I want the children. I want my child. I'll have a child. I have the children. And that's what I said at the time. Fortunately, the situation, worked out to where it wasn't my child. So that wasn't on my heart, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, that ended up being my personal situation. But I, for the most part, thankfully to my mother, I didn't take a bunch of chances like that. But again, had a couple of scares. And even in those scares, I was protected. One of them I was protecting myself. One I didn't a couple of times. So that's why it was even scary. But the time that I did, just out of my naivety, just the fact that I was with her during that time, you still have to consider it could be yours, even though I was protecting myself. Again, protection is not 100%. So it still was a fear at the time, but, my goal was that she go forward and have my child in the event had she, been pregnant. But luckily my mother was on me to the point where that's not something that came up a lot. But again, I got faced with a couple scares. And, at the time I stood by my values, in the sense that I'm not being honest, I'm not a believer in abortion. But again, circumstances, humans, you can get put in circumstances, and whatever your values are, they can be tested, and quite often, in the worst scenario, you will go against your own values. But again, this is not about a right and wrong for abortions. It's about the conversations that are necessary now that this is the new lay of the land. And so I think it's going to be a mistake to get focused on the right and wrong and not accept the reality if you end up being in a state like a Mississippi who's banned abortion, and a lot of these red states are going to ban it. So if you're in a red state, instead of being just upset about it and frustrated with how the vote went or didn't go and this kind of thing, I forgot to put I just realized I forgot to put the link on there for y'all to join. I'm sorry. I didn't do that. I done got to jumping. Let me do that real quick. So y'all can join in if y'all wanted to. I just realized that. Hold on. 1 second, y'all. I'm going to put the link out there on Facebook and YouTube for those that are watching. I just realized I normally put it in the thing so y'all can join me. I just forgot to do it today. All right, hold on 1 second, y'all. Let me get it out there. All right, bear with me. Stick with me. So I just got it up on, so it's on the Facebook. Okay, I think it's on Mental Dialogue and YouTube. Let me put it on my personal page just in case some of y'all are watching from the personal page. Give me 1 second, y'all. I just forgot to do it today. I didn't realize I did that. Forgot to put the link out. I usually have it ready to go right at the beginning, but I was doing too much in a new location. Kind of got off my schedule, but I want to make sure y'all got it so y'all can jump on here and give me y'all 3 cents as well. Because I definitely don't want to. I try to do at least 30 minutes, especially if I'm stuck doing it by myself. But if y'all join me, we can go make it go longer. Hold on 1 second. Let me put this link on my personal page. All right, here we go. Cool. All right, just put it up. So if y'all want to join me, please come in and give me your thoughts. But again, the bigger conversation is what now? What now has to, because if this is the new reality, if your state becomes one that bans it or already has banned it, if you will, if this becomes a new reality, it is a lack of focus and waste of time to not get ahead of the game. And how do we better prepare our children based on our reality has been, as I mentioned earlier, that this has always been on the table, whether you believed in it or not. It's been on the table, and a lot of people have used it to their benefit or whatever the case may be. And if that's no longer reality, then we have to think about what the messaging means for the new generation. Because if we're honest, again, the average abortion is not the extreme situation where it's a rape thing or whatever. Again, those aside. But if you look at the average situation in which people are making a decision, based on their personal, again, I don't care what you think is right or wrong, but what happens is if you think about being in that situation based on what your children, what your parents may have taught you, and you still ended up in that situation where you had to consider an abortion or not. You may have gotten one. Again, no judgment here, but you got to think about that moment. And I have friends who have been in this situation deciding to whether to have a baby or not, right? And so in that moment, what hits you? In that moment, you're going through, you knew better, you shouldn't have done it. You think about the things your parents taught you. All that is running through your head on, whether you're going to, take this on or not, right? So that's what's been happening based on whatever value set you have currently in today's time. Do y'all not? So what I'm highlighting, if the focus has to get off of, unless you're an activist that's going to somehow get this case back to the Supreme Court or whatever, unless you're doing that, then the focus has to come off of whether it's right or wrong or whether you agree with the decision. It has to get to what is the messaging going to be for a generation that does not have that on the table. Because here's the reality around the world. This is a divided conversation around the world. 60% of the world, prior to this decision, counting the United States, right? 60% of the world has access to abortions the way that we've known them. About 40% of the world does not. So the world is pretty divided on this conversation as well. And if you really look into the history of Roe v. Wade, it's partly possibly why it got turned over at the federal level. If you were to go get into the history, I'm not going to bring that up right now, because again, I'm not getting caught up in the right and wrong. I hope I'm highlighting how necessary the conversation and messaging has to be for a culture that's more sexualized being raised without that on the table. Whether you want it to be on the table or not, now that it's a reality, that's going to require the left and the right to have conversations about what that looks like. I remember in school, based on the AIDS epidemic, right, that happened in the 80s and that kind of stuff, I remember getting a lot of sex education, if you will, right, in the schools coming off the tail end of the AIDS epidemic, right? Then you had the crack era kind of around the same time, and then you had to just say no. So here's something that people possibly don't know. So for those that remember to just say no, it may seem like a simple slogan coming, in a sense from the government, if you will, but they can track the public messaging for AIDS and the public messaging for the drugs at the time. They can track improvement in a sense throughout the country based on those campaigns, regardless of what you individually think. That actually can be tracked. The biggest proof in the pudding is why we don't smoke no more, for the most part, as a country, right? Like you used to smoke on planes, right? And so for the years, big tobacco fought against all the cancer research they was trying to hide and keep from the public about whether nicotine and cigarettes stuff caused cancer. So once that got exposed and they had to put the Surgeon General stuff on there, which was in a sense a big blow, they fought it off for 50 years with a lot of misinformation and all this kind of stuff. But as I always say, science methodology, when done correctly, is what it is. It doesn't care about what your political belief is. So as much money as they put the big tobacco put into making sure the public didn't find out what the actual results were, the science itself was just correct, even though they put out false studies. When science is done correctly, the false studies don't hold up. And so eventually they got the label put on there, and it didn't stop there. So once that was known, then the advocates against cigarette smoking started doing the campaigns, and eventually you started seeing places that cigarettes allowed to smoke, right? They started cutting down those places. Or you had, you remember all the restaurants had smoking sections. If you remember when I was young, all the restaurants had smoking sections. And so I work in vending. And so baseball right now in Atlanta is the only, they have to go outside the stadium to smoke. But the Falcons got rid of it. The Hawks got rid of it. For those who know the Atlanta sports teams, like there's nowhere you can smoke in the arena. Imagine now, for people that like to smoke, usually for even people that don't smoke regularly, but smoke when they drink or whatever. So now you go to a concert, you only drinking. You're not smoking at those spots unless you at the baseball stadium where they have that. They still have it there. But I'm just showing you this became a big thing. And think about it, they used to smoke on a plane where there was oxygen. So I'm just highlighting that example to use that to say we got to get in front of the messaging if this is going to be the new landscape, because these larger campaigns are proof of how messaging can change culture. And I'm concerned that as upset as people are getting caught up in whether abortion is right or wrong, I'm concerned that nobody's going to speak to what does that language, what does talking to our children look like. I remember I did a couple of shows on the Men's Dialogue Talk Show talking about how to talk to children about sex, right? And there was a lot of good information. I had I think I had some therapists on for that show. But the other show was like, what did my parents teach me about sex? And the reality was hardly any of us have had great conversations with our parents about sex. I always big up my mom. She was the bomb. I never responded one time to none of them conversations, but she kept having them. And I'll be damned if I wasn't listening. And I realized when I went to college how much of a factor her conversations with me were compared to some of my friends who took more risk in this area when it comes to abortion. Again, even with her teaching, I had a couple of scares. Again, one time I protected myself, so probably shouldn't have been as scared. But as a young man, the first time somebody mentions they're pregnant that you've been having sex with, you're going to get scared even though you have been protecting yourself. So again, it was a real scare for me, even though for the most part, as long as I use, for the most part, as long as you use condoms correctly, they're going to be effective, right? And thanks to my mother, who not only had those conversations, but was concerned about me using it correctly, and then getting a little sex education in schools, if you will, based on the AIDS epidemic, which I know a lot of that has went away when you start getting into the beliefs and religion and things of that nature. I would say, however, if this is the new lay of the land, it may be time for both political parties, regardless of their beliefs, right? Because again, it's clear that this is the right who wanted to, in a sense, take this down. Again, I don't believe in abortion, but for me, it's not about my beliefs for what I'm having a conversation about. So as much as the right, if you will, are happy about this decision, I think to a degree, a lot of the conservatives have been big against sex education in high schools. I would offer that dialogue has to be revisited under this new landscape. And I would challenge the left to not be so upset with the right winning this decision to the point where we don't have a good enough dialogue about what to put in schools. Like, I can foresee this dialogue being so vitriol, especially in 2022, that neither political side of this ever is willing to capitulate and come up with good messaging for the next generation. So if what I'm saying makes sense, what's up, Sheffrin? So if what I'm saying makes sense right now, then it is imperative that the African American community specifically gets ahead of the messaging and not waste time on whether you think this thing is right or wrong. I'm not saying you can't have the dialogues, but it cannot be the gist of your dialogue when our babies are walking into a reality that may be walking into a reality that we've never had. Again, based on what happened with this decision, my guess is blue states will keep forms of abortions just based on their numbers. If they're typically a blue state, if you're a red state, look for it to possibly be banned. If, again, it can be done so without a federal fight anymore, right? And then I'm in Georgia, which is obviously having the got flipped a little bit. So it's kind of like the purple state, right? So there's half and half, if you will. And so, again, it's time to start figuring out what does those dialogues look like. Anybody want to jump in? I know I put the link up late, but I got a piece I want to share from the sister goddess that just literally laid down her perspective, and I agree with her 100%. And so her position, I'm gonna share that with y'all to close this thing out. her position is, partly her opinion, but I think it's a reality that it's time that we have to wake up to. And I'm really just encouraging, again, if our goal is to make it make sense and raise the culture. Wanda says the domino effect will be drastic. Absolutely. So that's why I want to do this dialogue. I don't know how long you've been listening, Wanda, but yes. So if we're not thinking about it, it's going to be drastic, and we're going to wake up 5 years from now or 10 years from now and just allow it to become drastic because we're not thinking about getting in front of the message based on this new landscape. So that was my challenge, in a sense, to the community, to raise the culture, to not waste time on whether you think this ruling is right or wrong, and go ahead and prepare, especially if you're in a red state, for the potential that your state will now rule out abortion. So what does that dialogue, what is the dialogue with your children? It's gonna become necessary that we have even more conversations about that reality. Because here's another thing that hardly ever gets considered when we think about our country's value systems when it comes to religion, if you will, because obviously a lot of our values have come from Christianity in this country, if you will, right? And so something that I hardly ever hear anybody talk about. So even for those who exhibit Christian values and saying that's the values that we need, what I've always said is, well, historically, humans got married young. So even in the event of you getting taught a Christian value, and maybe at 14 or 15 historically, or 17 or whatever the case may be, and your hormones take over your belief systems, right? And so it was a culture in which you get a girl pregnant, you would even go ahead and get married. Like my mother had me when she was young, and my paternal grandparents wanted my mother and father to get married because that was normal at the time. And if you've watched me a long time, then you know the hip hop generation, in a sense, we're that first quote unquote fatherless generation. I use that term simply to say at the point in which it became, unfortunately, normal to have children out of wedlock, whereas in the past that wasn't a normal thing, right? So when you go back to that period of time, which is really just 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, there was a very different thing that would happen if someone had a child. They would typically get married, or if not, since more people were married, it was easy for the village to raise children. We always say this comment now, we got to get back to the village, without realizing that what that actually looks like. It's easy to have village when you have a bunch of families, because sometimes, you can lose a widow to death or accident or something like that, and it's really easy to absorb another family when there are a bunch of families around, because there's a level of trust within that culture due to, as I've said on many other occasions, it's much easier to, and this makes sense, that societies have a level of trust for a married couple versus, a single parent, if you will. That's just a reality. Again, not the right or wrongs or the values of it, but I'm just saying that this decision is going to force a return, or we can not consider it and just worry about the right and wrong and waste time on that. And 5 and 10 years from now, look at the results because we didn't get in front of the messaging. And my message always is, as it always is healthy marriage before children. I think this decision is going to make that hashtag even more important than it ever has been. And when I say healthy marriage before children, it's figuring out what that even looks like. That's why the word healthy is in front of marriage, because I don't want people just to disparage marriage the way people typically do. As I say, marriage has become a bad word in 2022. But when you put it with this decision too, I'm not saying it's the only way to have children, but if there's going to be more children had, then the concept of what a family looks like and how do we take care of these children. Because again, if the average, matter of fact, I'm gonna find this, share this thought. Tika says right. Yeah, what does the village look like in the 21st century? There isn't one. And in a country that loves American individualism doesn't create one. When you go to other parts of the world, they still have villages, they still have family. And when I say village, I'm not talking about just living in a village. I'm talking about their culture is one in which it's not abnormal for the aunt to live right down the street and the uncle to live across the street and all of that, so it becomes normal to rotate the children between the family because it's understood with that, in a marriage, these different families are coming together. So they might have there's a different country where they have these marriage compounds, if you will, and everybody knows each other and things of that nature. And so that still exists around the world, but in a country with American individualism, and you now have this decision made to where now you're going to see more abortion come about, and we don't. And if we just go with business as usual, the consequences, as Wanda said, is going to be drastic. And I just wanted to get ahead of it and have a conversation to say we need to be moving and focusing on what these conversations looks like. We're really honestly, we're real lackadaisical about the conversations about sex with our children. We really are. And I'm talking about especially teenage years. There's too many of us that never had a conversation. And so part of the lay of the land is, and it's not about whether you're encouraging sex or not. I'm just talking about honest conversations of what that looks like, the consequences, and meaning children, and how to best prepare for that. Because if you're not having good conversations about sex, and when I say good conversations, I'm not talking about just talking about sex. I'm talking about honest conversations about sex to the degree that you better prepare, like my mother did me, not to have children in a situation in which you can't just say don't do it, like, and then that day happens and now you're here. You understand what I'm saying? You can't just say don't do it. So with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and share this piece. Let me go over the average thing real quick. Well, no, I'm just gonna share this piece. So again, this is a queen by some of y'all may know her. She's been on the Mental Dialogue show before. Six the Goddess. Now again, this is a lot of her opinion. I'm admit I agree with, but I'm more concerned about the bigger point of what she's making. Let me see this last comment, and I'm gonna share this real quick. I think I got another comment. Okay, no, I didn't. Thought I had another comment. All right, cool. So let me share this thought, and we out of here. Six the Goddess says, this Roe versus Wade abortion talk has been extremely eye-opening and scary to me. My mind cannot grasp the thought process of if we can't get the abortions, women will die. So y'all will really die before having condom/birth control sex? Instead of we can't get abortions, we should take the proper steps and self-control to not get pregnant unless we want a baby. It's if we can't get abortions, we will pass away. Like, she's just talking about the extremes that is being talked in. But this is what she said about that very comment. This is what I really want to share. She says, I'm 32 years old and I've never had an abortion in my life. So this isn't someone mansplaining. I've lived this. Not getting pregnant is not hard. As a woman, I have always known that it is my responsibility to protect myself and be selfless, not conceiving life and then killing my child because I was selfish. When I got pregnant with my son at 18, I womaned up, birthed him, loved, and raised him well. Was it a struggle? Yes. Was I going to kill him because I opened my legs? No. She says, it's ironic to me that so many women preach women's empowerment, then subconsciously give up their power by acting like they have no control over their own wombs, like pregnancy is something you accidentally catch. Then y'all say you love women, but you use rape, incest victims as a shield to justify why you need abortions when they are only less than 5% of the cases. The main reasons for abortion is one, not sure who the dad is, and two, you broke. So you flash rape victims in front of you. So they flash rape victims in front of you to get you through to the clinic. Disgusting. If women can't control their wombs, legs, opening, then they can't control anything. That is the first form of power and discipline as a woman. And if you would rather die than exercise that power, then you are subconsciously admitting you are powerless. God help us all. And so that's from a woman. Don't shoot the message. Get the message. And I think these are the real conversations we have to have now that this is becoming the lay of the land, more likely in red states. That's what I think the lay of the land will become. And these are the conversations about having sexual discipline to young boys and young girls. That's, I've always said that. Sexual discipline. but it becomes very different and more imperative that we figure out these messages and make sure we're having these conversations with our children. So that's my thought. Just trying to move it forward, raise the culture. Let's get past the right and wrong of it, and now start having true conversations based on the new landscape. I think these conversations are formable even if you're in a blue state, because you never know when those laws might get taken away as well. And again, I don't think we should focus on those extremes of the rape cases and and I get it. Some people are going to take risk and get bad abortions. I'm not saying none of that stuff is okay. I'm not saying any of that is okay, but they are the very minority of those who are getting abortions. Let me see this comment from Tika. She says, so true. 11-year-old sixth grader at my school was bragging about having oral sex with a 13-year-old boy. She showed the other students her video. They all turned against her. You're right. Parents must have continual conversations about sex with their children. Absolutely. And the thing is, I've done shows about what did you learn from your parents about sex, right? We had that show. And the reality is most of us didn't have enough good conversations. And that becomes even more imperative. And we need to speak to that, in my opinion, now, Tika, based on this new landscape. Because again, I think it'll be, my opinion, it'll be legal in blue states, illegal in red states. But now that there's no federal, in a sense, governance, if you will, over this situation, you never know which state you live in that might move to that decision. And so if we're not thinking about our messaging to our young people in a world that's more sexualized and is right in their hand, this is a land fire waiting to happen, right? It's waiting to happen because we're going to waste time on how wrong the decision was versus starting to figure out our language. So, yep, you say exactly. Nusha, thank you for watching. Queen, you say peace. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm so bad about saying it every week. So I hope again, I gave you, if you, Nusha, if you just jumped on, Tika, I don't know if you would want to jump on with me, but I like for people to jump on because I just did a 40 minutes of just dialogue of myself, a big 40-minute monologue. I hope it made sense. I hope people see, again, the attempt to erase the culture is just to move us past the right and wrong of it. And I personally think both political parties are going to have to consider working together, which hardly ever happens, on what happens for our school children going forward in public education, because there's a good opportunity to, in my opinion, return sex education. I think it's going to be much more needed under this new landscape. And, and then I hope that both sides will make concessions to make sure we are preparing our children for this new landscape, because sex is available and easier, it seems like, in each generation, and especially when you can swipe left in the swipe left culture, right? So it's not a lot even going into building just a personal relationship, less much the sexual relationships. And so to expect young people with those opportunities to be responsible would be foolish. And I know parents talk about it, but I'm really highlighting we can't waste time on this decision, because we just went through 50 years of this decision being in place. We don't know how long it's going to be in place going forward. And unless you're an activist willing and working in the law to do that, other than that, let's shut up talking about the right and wrong. Let's get on top of getting our messaging out. Again, I hope I'm waking some parents up. You got to have more honest conversations about sex. Like, think about, what do you think here's what I'll leave you with. What do you think your child understands about sex, other than you telling them don't get somebody pregnant, or don't get pregnant if it's a girl, right? What does your child really understand? Have you talked about the benefits of doing it with a significant other? Because here's the reality. I'm not even talking about just teenagers, even though I think this is going to raise some of that, because one last thing. This is really the last thing. So teenage pregnancy has went down over the last 20 years due to messaging, just to throw that out there, right? That's went down. Most children are had from ages 20 to 30 by women ages 20 to 30. And so just know it's adults that are making these decisions. And so you got to prepare your child for when they get to 20. Like, you're happy they made it to 20, didn't have a child. But keep in mind that 20 to 30-year-olds win the most babies had for all demographics. So if this is a new decision, if it's going to be a reality in your state, you got to have your child. I always say, have your child prepared for 20. A lot of times some parents spend, I do our school program, so I see what I'm talking about firsthand. I'm not just talking shit. But I see plenty of parents who ensure that their child's life is the greatest it could be in the first 20 years. Well, if you live 80 years, that's 60 years of preparation. You need to spend that 20 getting them prepared. We got to get them prepared for this new landscape. All right, y'all. Thank you, Tika. You said you love this. Yeah, the hard conversations are imperative. We just talk about we need to do them and don't do them. If this decision doesn't make parents get up on their game, I don't know what will. And I don't think parents will get up on it because we kind of let things happen. And we'll be mad about the decision, but don't think about what we should do and what it looks like for our children. So I hope it moves parents to individually talk to their kids, but also, as we talked about school cultures and things of that nature, that parents get together and start advocating for some level of sex education, because we're the generation that we're not getting married to our late 20s and late 30s. So for all the Christian values that you had in the past, if your hormones ran wild, you just got married, it was normal. No group, no humans have had to wait till they was 30 to be a virgin. You know what I mean? Like nobody would have done that. You know what I mean? I'm just keeping it a buck. Like our beliefs sometimes get in the way of what's happening in reality. And so yeah, it was easy to, I'm gonna say easy, but if you came up in a conservative Christian culture in which both supposed to remain virgin or that kind of thing, it's easy to do if you get married at 15 and married at 17. But to ask humans to make it to 30, so sex education has to get put back in these schools now that this is the decision, in my opinion. All right, I'm out. I'm just been repeating myself over and over. Hope I made some sense. Please share this with others. If you think this was a good broadcast people need to hear, please go to the YouTube page. Please follow us and share it. I'm out. Make it make sense. Raise the culture.